is Joe Vukov. I'm an assistant professor of philosophy here at Loyola University Chicago. The name of the article I wrote for the Nexus journal was called Science, Religion, and the Disaffiliation Crisis. And the article is really motivated by a couple of things. First and foremost, and it's where I'm drawing the title from, it's what's often called the disaffiliation crisis. So we see this trend among millennials and Generation Z that they're really falling off and disaffiliating with the Catholic Church and from religion generally. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for this, and I'm not the only person to have noticed this or written about this. It's something that a lot of people are concerned with right now, from ecclesial level to academic level to just sociological level, trying to understand what's going on. Because when you look at the numbers, I don't have them with me right now, it really is pretty extreme. When you go, the current generations, just how far and how quickly younger people are falling away from faith generally and from Catholic faith specifically. So that's been really on my radar, and there are a whole bunch of different reasons for that. And again, like I said, I'm not the only person to be thinking about this thing. So there's all sorts of reasons that people have identified. But the one that I've identified that I know something about and can say something about is the perception of the relationship between science and religion. And we don't have to guess here that millennials and Gen Z are falling away from the church because of a perception that science and religion don't get along that well. We have hard data here. So there's been a whole bunch of recent surveys out about this. In one recent survey, 59% of Americans said that they perceive there to be significant conflict between science and religion. And that's not just people who are not religious. When you dig down deeper, you see that 34% of US adults perceive conflict between science writ large and with their own faith. So these are not just people who have left faith or who are not religious and say, oh, you know, religion is the thing the other people do and we're concerned with science. No, this is also people who are still in a religious tradition perceiving there to be conflict between science and their own faith tradition. But we also have good data suggesting that people generally don't know a whole lot about either science or religion. So there's been a couple of surveys gone out about this as well. And in one we saw 66% of Catholics agreeing with the statement that Jesus is the first and greatest creation of God the Father, which of course is an almost verbatim statement of the Arian heresy. And if you're a Catholic who goes to Mass, you say the Nicene Creed over and over every single time you go to Mass, which of course is a almost word for word renunciation of Arianism, that Jesus is not the first and greatest creation of God, but he is rather God from light, God from God, light from light, true God from true God. So it's really interesting that even among practicing Catholics, you have a giant amount, the majority, who actually don't understand a really basic principle of their own faith, which presumably is something they're saying is exactly the wrong thing to believe every single Sunday when they go to Mass. On the flip side, another recent survey done by the Pew Research Group showed that 61% of Americans have only medium to low scientific knowledge. So what do you have here? You sort of have a perfect storm. You've got people who, number one, don't necessarily have a great understanding of their own faith tradition. Number two, you've got people who don't necessarily understand science all that well. Again, the majority on both of those indicating that they actually don't know that much about those two domains of knowledge, but also thinking that those two domains of knowledge are in direct conflict with each other. And it's not just an intellectual problem. Like obviously, that's already an intellectual problem when you think that there's this huge conflict between two things. Then when you actually dig down, they don't know that much about either. But it's also a problem of real existential importance. Something like leaving a faith tradition, whether you do or you don't, is something that shouldn't be founded on misperceptions or misunderstanding or something that you don't know something about. But we have data that people are doing precisely that. So that's really what motivated me to write this piece and to think more deeply about it, was the fact that we really do have this disaffiliation crisis on our hands. And it's due, at least in part, due to this conflict that people are perceiving that may not in fact be the case. And in fact, that's a big part of what I argue for in the article. I actually don't think that conflict is always the wrong way to understand the relationship between science and religion. I think sometimes aspects of faith, certain religious beliefs, can seem to be at loggerheads with scientific findings, and I think experientially that can be the case. I also think that most of the time, direct conflict is really not the best way to understand that relationship. And what I do in the essay, and what I've been working on in other work as well, is to try and push people to think about science and religion as being in a mutual dialogue rather than as in a relationship of conflict. One in which, sure, there can be some tension between the two, there can be some give and take, but it's not like a winner takes all. One has to be right, one has to be wrong, and you don't get to have both at the same time. But rather one in which you can have interplay between the two and arrive towards a greater understanding of the truth between them. And then going backwards is that hopefully some of that intellectual work of trying to see at least a more sophisticated relationship between science and religion can draw people away from this facile understanding that they're just either one or the other, and do my part to contribute to trying to alleviate the disaffiliation crisis.